Hey there, everybody. Really glad you could join us here for another Talent Equation podcast episode. This one's an absolute doozy with Shawn Myszka, who's a physical development specialist who works with a load of NFL players. But just a little health warning on this one. There's a little section in the early part where there's a little bit of echo on where Shawn is talking. So just wanted to flag that with you all. It's only lasts for about 2-3 minutes during his introduction, and after that it levels off. So it's definitely worth persevering through that, or you could just scroll through it if you want to get to the good stuff at the end or the middle of the podcast. Anyway, enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Talent Equation podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Super excited to have Shawn Myszka. Am I saying that right?
Yes, you are saying it right. And even if you weren't, most people don't. So sometimes I don't even get it right myself. So no worries.
So, yeah, great to have Shawn on the podcast. We've kind of, we're those the people who've had conversations, over Twitter and been exchanging kind of ideas and thoughts. And actually, it was high time that we had a proper conversation, and we're recording it for the audience's pleasure. Shawn, delighted to have you on.
Sir, my friend, it's a pleasure to be on. I appreciate the opportunity, and I obviously appreciate your message over the last number of years and getting to know you and what you stand for, what you think about, and I highly respect your thoughts and your ideas. So I'm delighted to be here, and I'm delighted to talk to you, and hopefully some people that are listening get something out of this as well.
I'm absolutely sure they will. Shawn, you've been in this industry for quite a long time. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your backstory and how you got started and what brought you to where you are today?
I've been training NFL players, nothing but NFL players now for the last 7 years here in the States. I've had something now like 79, or I think I might have just booked my 80th NFL player yesterday. So we'll see if he makes it through the cut, or if I make it through his cut as well. But I do things a little differently now. I break down their film. I look at every single rep they've ever performed out on a field when pressure and chaos and anxiety and fatigue and all the rest of the hoopla that goes along with playing the sport. I break down their movement there. And I start there, and I use that as my lens. That's my screen, and I reverse engineer from there. So I try to fill in the blanks with what they're doing in the weaknesses in their movement skill, but then I also try to enhance and kind of exacerbate their strengths to a greater degree as well. So it's a little different approach than what most people take here still in this country and NFL players, but I believe that we kind of found something here with how I do it. It's the way that I wholeheartedly believe in it. It's way more time consuming. There's a lot more speculation. You got to put yourself on a limb a lot, but the fruit is there and the reward is there, and the players get it and the players see it. And hence the reason you always hear me rambling about repetition without repetition, and you hear me rambling about representative learning environments, and you hear me rambling about authentic movement signatures and movement variability and all those fancy little buzzwords that we might address even further as this conversation goes on.
Oh, so many questions now. You just taking you back to the start a little bit. You mentioned how you've kind of relatively recently moved into a kind of a new world where you're looking at things like repetition without repetition and working in using movement variability. Kind of what was the catalyst for kind of, I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day as well, talking to Joey Peters, and sometimes you feel like you've taken the blue pill in Matrix. You kind of almost wish you could go back, because now you're in this whole new world of learning and there's so many things that you've still got to develop. So what was the catalyst that started you on the journey?
Oh, great question. Fantastic question. And it'll probably be relatively long-winded as well, so I apologize in advance to the listeners for that. There's been three kind of turns in my career, or three shifts, if you will. The first one came with the one that I mentioned in the introduction. When I first started working with NFL players, I was really trying to drive them towards the increase in physical qualities, because I believe that many of the preparatory means and methods that were being done for them were a little outdated. And we did just that. We increased all the numbers and the values and things like that you would have come to expect for a physical preparation coach or specialist working with an individual player. 40 times going down, pro agility times going down, vertical jump and broad jumps going up, all of those types of things, right? More lean muscle mass, you name it. But then when I watched those players, especially one in particular who happened to be my very first NFL player, and I watched them on field, I realized that didn't go anywhere. Nothing changed. And now, of course, I'm not saying that I didn't do what it is that I had maybe set out to do or what the player needed or wanted or thought they wanted, but I just didn't see the impact and influence that I was hoping for, especially when I expected to kind of take over the NFL through my training, So at that point, that kind of led me to my first Robert Frost moment, where there were two roads diverged in the trail. I had to go down either the path less traveled or the one that everyone else, as well as myself, had already been walking. Fortunately for me, I walked down the path that was less traveled, and I started to go down the movement route. I started to really break down how those guys were moving, but I didn't do it, my friend, when and where it counted, which was on the field yet. And so we started to really address movement technical execution. I'm a biomechanics junkie at heart, just like many of the listeners and just like many in the field. But what I realized is it wasn't just about biomechanics, even though I started addressing them. We started to go maybe a perfect model or a repetition after repetition type of model, and I started to strive towards almost perfection in movement. And they would look nice and neat and sexy and clean and crisp and clear when we were in the training setting, when we were in the practice setting. And they could rehearse movement and combinations of movement way better than any of their peers. Way better than any of my athletes. So I thought, here it is. I finally found the holy grail of sport movement skill acquisition. And then they went out on the field, and chaos and pressure and anxiety and all those things that we know are realities of sport started rearing their ugly head, and there went my perfect movement. My perfect movement ran away from me. Their perfect movement ran away from them. And I started to then have these light bulb moments, because I had to kind of have this reinvention, if you will. I had to take that matrix pill and realize, wait a minute, what am I missing here? I started to realize that it was more about that repetition without repetition rather than repetition after repetition type of model. And once I did that, my friend, once I got to that point and introduced more variability in the environment, different context, changing context almost every single rep in some way, shape, or form, even at the level of the athlete in their behaviors, in their brain, their biomechanics started to change. That's where you often hear me talk about the 3 B's of movement, what I believe: behaviors, meaning sensory and perceptual qualities; brain, meaning cognitive decision-making, and some of those ways that they're taking in information and what it means to them and what it represents to them; and then their biomechanics. And until I really started to look at that and address it with my athletes, maybe allow them to become more comfortable being uncomfortable, we didn't really start to see the change or the true transfer We might have had, really good retention from session to session, but when we got in the chaotic or representative learning environment, it didn't show itself until we made that repetition without repetition type of change. And since I've done that now, it's been about 3 years, it has been a drastic night and day difference as to what I see out on the field from my players each and every Sunday. And they love it. They grab onto it. They gravitate towards it as well. In fact, many times early in the off seasons now that they've experienced it, they often ask for the introduction of a messier, more chaotic, or more open environment earlier. And, these are NFL players who understand what it means, but they are used to rehearsing movement. If you go and watch them out on the practice field in their professional organizations, this is one of the biggest things that I can recommend to NFL strength coaches or NFL position coaches, as well as in coaches at all levels across the mastery spectrum, is when you watch them and you see them go to that perfect model, but it never ever shows itself where they start to get some of those issues and compensations that can be deemed dysfunctional when we watch them in the chaos, it means that we're missing something. And that would be the first recommendation or piece of advice that I could give to anyone who's coaching, and doesn't just have to be pro athletes, anyone who's coaching any athletes, is the athletes understand that if you make it a problem-solving activity of movement, it looks, feels, behaves, and acts like the game. And they get it. They understand it. And they start to grasp onto it. And they don't mind being in a mistake-filled environment then, because they realize what the improvements in that mistake-filled environment actually means to them. Their ability to, whether it's consciously detect and correct errors, or whether it's an emergence of a more authentic movement signature that allows them to solve those movement problems more fluidly, more readily, with high adaptability, they get it, and they ask for it earlier. And they ask for more of it, more chaos. And, of course, there comes a point there where maybe too much chaos is still too much because I, still have liability insurance I got to cover here. I've realized now through those shifts, and like I warned everybody, it was probably going to be a long-winded answer, but through those shifts, I realized there was my blue pill. There was my matrix pill. And that was the thing that now gets me up every single day and realizes, what else can I do to change them at that 3B level through the environment and how I'm trying to shift or shape their movement in the emergence of it in the sport.
So you took that kind of brave decision, as I think many of us do, to actually go into a place that you've not been to before and to take your athletes with you on that journey. Were you open with them about that and say, look, you're going to learn as you go, or did you kind of initially say, did you say here we go, we're going to, kind of keep it from them and just say we're going to work in a different way? How did you manage that process?
That's a great question, my friend. I would say at the beginning I started by kind of dabbling in it. They know that I'm constantly trying to evolve myself. They know how I think about things, and they love that about me. That I'm like, I'm going to try this. I'm very open with telling them I'm going to try something, but I don't know exactly how it's going to work. And my ego doesn't usually deal with that very well. But once I made it such a partnership with them that they understand, if Shawn wants me to create in my movement, and Shawn's trying to create something different over here, I'm going to trust him just as he trusts me with my movement solutions. And I think it becomes such a give and take type partnership like that they, luckily, by the grace of God, somehow I was blessed with them to be able to say, okay, we trust you when you do this. But I would say I dabbled at first with the introduction of some of those means and methods and making the movement problems messier. It was, as many times as coaches or skill acquisition specialists or whatever we want to refer to us as, sometimes we get so hands-on, we try to own the movement solution so much that we own the movement problem as well, or the drill and the activity. And once I started to look at it as a learning activity, and that they were going to fall off the bike once a while in the process of learning how to ride that bike better or more efficiently or more effectively and more optimally, then once I kind of let it go, I'm not somebody who in my life really likes to dabble very much. I go all in myself. So once I realized, like, here I am, I'm kind of like wading into the water, I'm like, screw it, I'm diving in once they started to like grasp onto it. And then we kind of dived in, and now I would say at any given moment, at least 50 to 60% of my work is truly done in that messy, organic, chaotic environment. Don't get me wrong, we still work on technical execution at times. We'll still do some, let's call it, I hate to use this term even, but rehearsal of technique. We still do some of that because I believe that there's still a time and a place for them just to get that kinesthetic sense and awareness and almost do that kinesthetic screening for themselves. The thing is, though, my friend, we've done less and less and less and less of that unless there's truly a technical change that I believe has to be made because it's a compensation that's proving itself to be dysfunctional when they move, and it's a highly repeatable movement pattern, such as maybe a wide receiver getting out of their stance and accelerating out of it, and their knee is dumping or they're not working through proper angles or something like that. Something I know that's going to happen frequently. Maybe a defensive back in their back pedal because it forms the foundation of everything else that they do. But the thing that I've done more and more and more throughout that process to make that technical execution, that technique, something that I believe is a skill, is we add the behavior and brain component to it as well at all times. So maybe before where I did that biomechanical rehearsal, such as that wide receiver getting off in their stance, I never not have someone in front of them right now. Like I want their brain and their behaviors taking in information similarly so we can make that transition into truly being a skill, into truly being something of that repetition without repetition model right from the start.
So even when you go into what I would refer to in my sport as, say, technical shaping, where somebody's having a problem and actually you do need to start to drill into the specific area within the movement or what it is they're trying to do that they just need to improve slightly to break through that. But even in that context, where possible, you're going to put some sort of perceptual cue in there as well.
100%. And that might be, when we talked about kind of that evolution of my ideas or my practice methods, that might be the biggest thing that I changed in the last year and a half, 2 years, is I started to really dive into more of David's work, Button and Bennett with Dynamics of Skill Acquisition, and now their new stuff that came out in 2016 here, which I love. But I remember when I first read Dynamics of Skill Acquisition, and in there they talk about some of Gibson's ideas with perception and action coupling. And when you think about it, at least in making sure that it applies in an open, chaotic, organic sport, you can't ever really separate the action from the perception. And in between that perception and action lies a little thing called intention. And somewhere in there, we have to address each aspect of that. And I believe that's kind of where my 3B model or the 3B model that I've adopted from certain people has kind of been shaped from, and why I talk about it so frequently, is I never let the biomechanics emerge without the behaviors in the brain being thought about, discussed, or addressed in some way, shape, or form. So when we're really talking about technical shaping, if you will, or technical solutions or technical efficiency or whatever it might be, whatever buzzwords we want to throw in there, I don't ever address it independently of intention or perception. And, the perception starts the cycle. So if a player is going to be let's say if it's that wide receiver again and he's coming out of his stance when the ball is snapped, we have a set go, we have a set hut, or we have a ball snap, and there's someone in front of him. Maybe that someone isn't behaving exactly like a defensive back would or their opponent, but what they do is they give at least representative learning enough for them to be able to know what they're looking at, when they're looking at it, what that means for their problem solving. Yeah. And then they can let the technical execution, even that specific technical shaping that you referred to, that might need to be addressed, we can let that emerge in something that's going to look and feel and behave closer to the way that it's going to have to when they perform on a Sunday. And it might be a little different. I'm the first to admit that it might be a little different because I happen to be working with individuals who are Ferraris of human beings, so people will often point the finger at me and say, well, they're already the world's best compensators. And I get that. But yet at the same token and same time, maybe my process towards getting that movement emergence to occur is a little more rapidly occurring because we're talking about the world's best compensators. But the flip side of that, my friend, is these are also guys who've been performing this sport for 10, 15, 20 years. So if that whole repetition after repetition model was really the way, I wouldn't be able to change those movement solutions. But instead, I do, and I don't do it. The environment does it, or the task does it. Yeah. But we're able to change it and facilitate that movement solution to change rather quickly based on just giving them more of those things at that 3B level.
So, it's a fascinating area for me because I had Dr. Richard Bailey on the podcast. He'll be the episode probably before yours goes out, and I was talking to him about this and saying, because there's quite a lot of debate, as you know, about what you might call the isolation camp, I suppose, who still sees a role for the isolated movement rehearsal aspect, and what you might call the ecological community, which is now looking much more at how we can use environment and tasks and constraints in order to bring about movement challenges. And what Dr. Bailey said to me, which I think you might find interesting, was that he said people get confused between learning and practice. So what he said was, the research is pretty unequivocal that if it's about learning, there needs to be a problem to solve.
Yeah.
If there's no problem to solve, then you're not learning. All you're doing is essentially, as you say, practicing, rehearsing. And there's a place for rehearsal, as you quite rightly point out, and your methods for doing rehearsal might be more of that kind of isolated drill type activity. But if you're interested in learning, which I think most of us in the skill acquisition community are, actually you need to look at a different methodology. And for me, to have almost a scientific validation and actually a little bit of clarity to say, don't get confused when we're talking about the use of a drill, for example, an isolated drill. There is a role for that, but it's for a specific purpose.
Yes. And that's something that's a really interesting thought. When you talk about the two separate camps, people often hear me talk so much about the ecological approach and that perception action side that they think that I'm all the way on that other end of the extreme and that I never use isolated drills. And then they come, or isolated activities, if we will. Yeah. Because I really don't like the use of the word drill, even for that matter. Even in NFL players, I try to talk to them about everything that we do being truly a learning activity. So if we're truly trying to shape their movement to become a solution to a problem, because that's all they face. All they face is problems in sport. And I use that whole, Sif and Verkhoshansky quote from back in the day, that sport is nothing but a problem-solving activity where movement is used to produce the necessary solutions. And so all of my guys kind of know that. They see a Post-it note on the dash of my car that says it, for goodness sakes. So they hear me talking about that, and they realize, even if this is done in isolation, if it doesn't get messier, if it doesn't get to the point where they make some mistakes, if there doesn't get to the point where they get to go out there and create and understand what it means to carry over and transition into being utilized out on the practice field or out on the game field, then, I've watered that drill or that activity down too much. And so that's, I think, the biggest thing, when we think about those camps, is I think we all have to try and exist somewhere more in the middle and see each other's sides a little bit more and realize where we can mold the two camps together, because there's definitely, like you said, a time and a place for some of those isolated drills done, as long as we can still maintain context of the problem as it represents in sport. And that's kind of what I was talking about too in my previous answer, with the whole behavior and brain level, and still allowing that perception and intention to remain, so we never lose that.
Sorry, carry on.
No, you go. Go ahead.
So I think for me, this is what I refer to, and it's interesting the whole drill D word, the D word, you know. There's a researcher called Danny Newcomb, again, he'll be on the cast, and he's developed something. He's just about to he's going to publish it shortly, actually, a paper called the Environment Design Framework, and he refers to different types of activity and kind of almost gives them titles so that we know what we're talking about. I mean, so people, I think, use the word drill, and it means lots of different things to different people.
100%.
For me, yeah, and I use the word, I call it the funnel of variability, and I like to think of it as a funnel that, where the water goes down the funnel, and it's almost a bit like a vortex, I suppose. And at the bottom, not much is happening. There's not a lot of chaos. There's not a lot of swirling activity, but at the very top it's extremely fast, and there's lots of spinning around and all sorts going on. And if you have the chaos of the full game and that's all you have, then that's too much. There's too much information coming in, so you can't attend to the problem that you need to solve. Likewise, if you go down the other end where there's nothing, then you're not getting something that's the same. So I think you need to slide up and down that funnel and play around with it by manipulating different either environmental or task or socio-cultural constraints in order to bring about the changes. And it's actually, I find real I think of it almost like a DJ mixer, you're mixing different things to just try and find the right blend.
Yeah, I love it. In an unashamed way, I'm going to tell you, flat out, and I'm going to preempt it, that I am going to use that funnel analogy over and over and over and over again, because I absolutely love that. Because I think that's exactly what, that's where the gray area, if you will, because when you're talking about that funnel or you're talking about the DJ mixing, it's a little grayer, and it's finding that optimal blend for every population of athletes and for every coach or facilitator who might be attempting to, help or guide athletes towards the emergence of more optimal movement solutions. And I really like the way that's put. It's not black and white with these learning activities. It's a really gray, and it's, it's like that DJ where it's just you got to find that optimal blend, and that optimal blend is different for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I talk about this is because I generally speaking, I think a bit like you. If I can avoid going 100% isolated by just layering in some other level of variability, that's where I want to live.
Yeah.
I very much try, but I think of it like it's almost like salt. You don't want too much of it. So I'm not saying I'm not going to have it, because or whatever, I'm not going to use an isolated movement pattern at any point. I'm not ever going to take that off the agenda. I think I've just been trying to challenge coaches to say, hey, try and think a bit more creatively, create a little bit of additional variability, and actually you create far more engagement anyway. And like you say, even with NFL players, these guys are loving it and asking for more. Yeah,
and I think that's such an interesting paradigm to shift there, because I think when we really start to think about it, is we all want, when I go and talk and present to coaches and teachers and whomever it may be that works with athletes, they all tell me, like, well, we want a cookbook of drills. Like, give us more drills. I'm like, do you watch the game? Like, you understand you have all the activities you could ever want as long as you figure out what you can tease out and tease in of that learning activity, because you don't want it to exist at the top of that funnel necessarily at all times like you indicated. I'm not suggesting that either. Like sometimes people will say, well, the game teaches itself. I don't exactly believe that. I mean, it can ultimately, if we have just a bunch of compensators, but I already got a bunch of compensators. There are certain things that I need to do in order to make their movement or help to get their movement, help facilitate that change at that 3B level, if I can give them a different perceptual cue or idea, a different intentional cue or idea, or a different kinesthetic screen or awareness in regards to what they're doing biomechanically. And so I think that's something that we all need to do as well. I sit down and kind of have think tanks pretty frequently with coaches and try to determine when they're watching the game, what exactly are they looking at? What are they seeing? Where do they believe that their athletes are looking? What do they believe their athletes are thinking? What are they trying to get their athletes to do? Combine movement patterns, and why? And I think the more we have those types of discussions, or we make those challenges like what you just indicated in regards to all of us looking to create better learning environments, I think that's really where our field as a whole needs to go. And as a positive byproduct of that, we're going to have athletes who are truly better problem solvers, because we're going to have all these creative activities being done, and athletes are going to get a chance to find their authentic movement signatures, not necessarily get stuck in this robotic technical execution where if so-and-so did it, it must be the best way to move. And that's maybe one of my biggest pet peeves in this entire community. I have only witnessed one Barry Sanders. I've only witnessed one Antonio Brown. I've only witnessed one of these guys. If I've trained running backs, I train wide receivers. If I tried to get those guys to move like either one of those individuals, we're going to have problems. And so finding that authentic movement signature, testing for that variability, getting control of that variability, I believe all happens through what you talked about or discussed with the creation of better, more creative activities.
And even if you could create Barry Sanders, even if you could just literally, out of nowhere, everybody look like Barry Sanders, well, defenses would adapt to that.
Yeah, 100%.
You don't want that, do you?
No, you don't want it, yeah. You want to allow them to be who it is that they are, who it is that they were gifted to be, and what it is that has evolved in their biodynamic structure of movement, how they solve movement problems, into, again, like I said, magnify those strengths, magnify that authenticity, but then fill in the gaps or the things that might be missing. And sometimes it's because of the drills and the exercises and some of the methods that we use that the lack of creativity in their movement solutions actually emerges from, I believe. And that I see at my level for sure. They're like, so-and-so ran, so-and-so is running with the ones, and they're on the start high up at the depth chart. They're a Pro Bowler or whatever they might be, and I'm behind him. Well, if I run more like him or if I behave more like he does, I'll be able to be a better version of him and then take his spot. It just doesn't work that way, And so I think that kind of speaks to that point as well.
So you quite rightly pointed out earlier on that you are working with Ferraris, and you're working with the kind of elite performers. So obviously, a lot of people who listen to this podcast are working in that really messy and chaotic space of working with the adolescent athlete. What sort of I know you probably do similar things yourself as well, but I'm just interested to know what you think translates from the high performance context that you're working with down to that space. Yeah,
I think there obviously it's got to be a little bit more true teaching, and finding that whole idea of explicit versus implicit, or how we guide movement solutions for that different level of mastery, I think is a really intriguing idea or concept. How we actually go about instructing and how much implicit versus explicit instruction really exists there. Because I can set out a movement problem for an NFL player to solve, and they have many different, even if we want to, even if the generalized motor program or schema theory actually truly exists, if that exists and stands as truth, if it does, let's just say hypothetically it does, that player has certain explicit knowledge base that they can call upon. But even if it's subconscious or unconsciously occurring, and it's something that's happening from the bottom up in that player, they've had many experiences that perceptual motor landscape has kind of been shaped from. Versus when you're talking about the adolescents or the lower level of mastery of athletes, obviously they're a much cleaner slate. I think there's positives and negatives that come along with that. The negative being, of course, that you have to find that optimal balance between explicit and implicit and try to figure out maybe how to communicate at a level with them, or whether it's conscious or subconscious again, to communicate with their biodynamic structure to be able to shape their skill in certain ways. I believe there maybe because there's less, repetitions being performed there, less experiences having been done, that it can be more bottom-up in nature as well. That maybe we can make it more implicit by just setting up things and you'll actually keep engagement high. One of the things, like, this sounds odd, but many times people ask me what I do, and hopefully my NFL players themselves aren't actually listening to me right now, that sometimes it's like working with just overgrown, highly skilled 4-year-olds. So, for me, so sometimes it's kind of the same beast, as far as the communication barriers, if you will, that actually exist when we're talking about that whole implicit versus explicit side of instruction or facilitation of skill. But I believe wholeheartedly, my friend, that if ever in doubt, we're trying to go towards repetition after repetition or repetition without repetition, whether it's the young athletes or the old, whether it's the low level of mastery or skill or the highly skilled mastery of athletes. A repetition without repetition model, I am firm in beliefs saying that we should gravitate more towards that than the opposite. And people will say, well, your athletes, again, they are the Ferraris. They get to compensate better than everyone else. So it's, really far-fetched to say that you could do that same type of thing with younger level athletes. But any athlete of any sort is still a human being. And human beings are human organisms who love to solve problems. And the more problems that we can give them, the more they're, again, no matter what camp you exist at, whether it's, more ecological, dynamical systems, complex systems, or whether it's, more of the IP type of models, the generalized motor program or schema theories and other information processing models, no matter what you believe to be true there, I believe that we can shape movement more readily, more effectively, more efficiently with that ever-changing model of practice.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because, so are you familiar with a guy called Kelvin Giles?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, movement dynamics. So I got to know Kelvin pretty well. He's done some brilliant talks for me in the past. My favourite line of his is about how kids these days can't walk, talk, and chew gum at the same time. But he used to say something which stuck with me for a long time, which was, he said, it's the physical ability to do the technical stuff, and then the technical ability to do the tactical stuff in that order. In the last number of years, along a similar time frame to you, I think it's the other way round. I think that the players need to be able to have the tactical appreciation of what the game is asking them to do, in order then to start to devise what their technical or their skill-based solutions are. And then I think we then need to then provide them with the physical capabilities in order to do that. Because otherwise, it seems to me we're giving them tools for a job that they may not actually have to do.
Yeah, no, that's such an interesting, that's another interesting paradigm shift to really think about. Because especially, and you probably know where my ideas or answer would go with this, because I believe everything starts with that perception. But the perception is also connected to the intention. And the behaviors that are going to then emerge out as far as the biomechanics are concerned are going to be driven from that intention and that perception. It's all this dog chasing its own tail that's always connected to the problem. And that kind of speaks to what it is that you're speaking to right there. That kind of, hits on that same idea and is connected to that. It's about the problem first. How can we prescribe solutions without figuring out what the problem is going to dictate by the solution or for the solution? And once I really started to, once that light bulb went off for me, it was life-changing for what I do in my craft. And I think it would be, even if I were to take, say, a group of 6-year-olds and try to do the exact same things. There might be a little different change in complete, methodology as far as my guidance is concerned, my instructions, my feedback, the type of observational learning I do, all of those types of things. But I don't know how much the learning activity would actually change all that much,
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? I often think about that myself and wonder, would. Well, one thing. It's definitely. I was talking about this earlier. It's definitely challenged me around my kind of instructional approach, less instructional approach. Definitely challenged me because, of course, when you are utilizing constraints as a methodology to change levels of awareness and therefore solve problems, when you're doing that, and you therefore, you can't just go jumping in with instructions as to how to do it, otherwise kind of defeats the object.
Yep.
So it changes entirely your questioning, your how you solicit information from those individuals themselves so that you can understand what they're perceiving. It's a completely different set of skills.
Yeah, it almost definitely is. Yeah, it most definitely is. And I think that's, like I said, that's probably the thing that would maybe change the most, but it might actually change less. I just don't have that experience of necessarily working with that population to say or speak to for sure that I would change in those ways. But, I mean, it's such an interesting idea that once you start doing this constraints-led approach, one of the things that came about from that, at least for me personally, which you just highlighted, was me talking less. And as any of the listeners can probably tell already, that comes hard for me. I don't like talking less at all. And so my players loved it, my athletes loved it, and I probably would do something in the same for kids then, because you can't just jump in and say, here's how you got to solve this problem, because you don't know for sure maybe what they're seeing, when they're seeing it, what it means to them, and what it means to their solution. And you just kind of like let that emerge at times. Now, don't get me wrong. Like you say, there are times that, just like with the isolated drill, you're going to jump in and try to give them some feedback. You're going to have to get in there and probably instruct to a certain degree, at least give them a base level problem to help them solve, or maybe give them hints or cheat codes, if you will, towards their solution. But to get in there and prescribe a solution, you can't ever say. I know some of my guys I've had for 6 or 7 years too. Like, I've had these guys for a long time. I know their movement solutions almost as good as they do, but I'm not in them. I'm not in their meat suit of a body running around. So I can't say for sure how they should go about solving it, because I don't know what they saw and who they were at that exact moment of that problem. And so I think that's what makes a constraints-led approach, or a constraints-led approach, if we're gravitating to that much more intriguing to utilize. And I think we're only hitting the tip of the iceberg with maybe how we should manipulate those constraints in a messy, chaotic environment.
That's and then for me, that's one of the things that's so fantastic about this, and I probably feel I sound like I'm a bit evangelical about it, but it's because there is so much more to explore. And from a coaching perspective, I feel like I'm born again, because I'm constantly learning and developing. Shawn, can you believe we've been going for 43 minutes?
Ironically, my friend, I can believe that, even though it's been very short.
I feel like, so we're coming up on time, and I feel like, hey, look, we've got to definitely do a part 2. You just mentioned cheat codes. We're coming back to that, I promise you, because that's a really good, interesting area to explore with you in more detail. But anyway, look, in the meantime, where can people find out more? Because I'm sure they'll be really interested. So how can they contact you, and how can they find out more?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone is welcome to email me at Shawn, SHAWN, at optimizemovement.com. And then I also have a website called optimizemovement.com, which is a content site, but off of that content site is my YouTube channel, which has a bunch of free videos in regards to movement optimization ideas, and movement skill acquisition ideas. If you just type in Shawn Myszka, the last name is Myszka, on YouTube, you will find, probably 70, 80 free videos where I kind of talk about these ideas. And then my blog is footballbeyondthestats.wordpress.com. So the world's longest URL there, but footballbeyondthestats.wordpress.com.
Shawn, I really appreciate you coming on, and thanks so much for sharing your thoughts on how we can develop better skilled athletes.
The pleasure's been all mine, my friend. I appreciate the time and efforts.